Welcome, Yvonne and Sabina. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Yeah. So what we have in mind is to walk people through in a little more in depth into each one of the threads and talk about them, sort of follow their trajectories from the beginnings all the way through. Maybe weave together some information about practices and also personal experiences. Just kind of focusing in on one thread and talking about that in as much detail as we feel like. So, thank you for being here with me. We're going to be doing all four of these threads. So, yeah, we'll kind of figure out a structure and try to parallel um, that structure across each one of these threads. So, thank you for agreeing to do this and be here with me. And yeah. So let's start with the emptiness thread. What I call the emptiness thread. I have in the past, when I was formulating this model, I think I initially called it the deconstruction thread. Um, I may have used other terms at some point, early on as well. Landed on emptiness, but emptiness has kind of like a technical meaning within different kinds of forms of Buddhism. And so I'm not meaning to necessarily equate this thread with any particular Buddhist school or philosophy. I'm using the term more generally, although it does connect, I think, with Buddhist ideas. I'm using the term more generally. And but this is the thread that is most universally promoted or valued by most forms of Buddhism. Um, it's also also the form of spiritual practice or approach to spirituality that is very common within Advaita Vedanta circles and some other approaches from India. And I would say the basic dynamic here is seeing through, particularly seeing through concepts, seeing through um, ideas, seeing through constructs. Um, we could say it's an approach of negation because it's like anything that seems to be uh, posited as a reality of some kind is eventually deconstructed or seen through or um, perceived as being empty within this threads approach. So what are some ways that you all talk about the emptiness thread with your clients? And I just kind of gave it my wording. What are some ways that you speak about this thread and what it's all about?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly like seeing through the self-illusion, seeing through illusions. And then, well, for me, it was like uh, the first really emptiness phrase that came to me was, I think it is by Krishnamurti. The word is not the thing. And like, mm, showing them that the mental constructs are not the same as the direct experience. So that's what I usually do.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, it's the same. It's all about deconstructing the concepts or realizing that none of the concepts we have about ourselves or the world or anything are real in the sense that they exist, have their own existence, their own self. Um, Usually, for me, in my own process and also with my clients, the thing was that it's more like the shadow twin, how they also call it, of the emptiness. The reason I got in touch with it and many people that come to me is because they are kind of lost in some shadow twin emptiness kind of thing, dissociation, or just no, never really had a stable, healthy self, which feels very similar to emptiness. So often I deal with people that have watched a lot of YouTube videos about Neo Advaita and teachers that tell them, you're not here, nobody's here, nothing's real. And then they lose kind of track with reality, like with daily life reality. Some of them get depersonalizations or other kind of like psychological things. And so they land in a place where first they are really like kind of on the wrong track with emptiness, you could say. And that happens often on a very early stage in my experience with awakening. Because when the further it deepens, you can feel the difference between the two. But that's basically how usually I talk to people about emptiness. And I also check in with people, are they stable enough to deconstruct the concepts? Because there are many people that are not, and then it's better not to go into emptiness with them. I guess that's one of the beauties of your model is that you need to have a tendency, a natural tendency, and not a forced tendency. Like because of we have all this material going on, you could say like, yeah, I need to go into emptiness. Everyone tells me I need to, but maybe it's not your thread. Maybe you're not ready yet. So for me, actually, it's not so much that I teach people how to go into emptiness, but more like telling them how to deal with yeah episodes of emptiness that are not so healthy.
Hmm. Yeah, I was gonna bring up some pitfalls
Later.
with this later, but this is a good, maybe it's a good point to start off with. Really differentiating between, what is an awakening experience versus what is maybe a psychologically destabilizing or something that we wouldn't necessarily call awakening. Um, So for me, I tend to describe awakening as having these three kind of facets to it. It's kind of a human experience or something that can happen to, I think, to a lot of people, either inside or outside of spiritual practice frameworks. And I'm looking for basically like the hallmark of an awakening is I'm looking for these three things to be present. Not necessarily all at the same time, but what through the trajectory of the thread kind of opening and deepening that these three kind of qualities or these three things will come out eventually. And so the first one is that this is not a thought-based, um, it's experiential, right? It's perceptual. It's not just based on a change in philosophy or a change in your thinking. Oh, I now realize that concepts can be questioned, right? In a philosophical way, wouldn't be an awakening. It's really like a shift in um, your perception. So, for example, if you have seen through the concept of space or of time that your perception of space or your perception of time will dramatically change, will fall away, will be non-existent. Your perception of the self, it's kind of like what you've previously thought of as yourself has been seen through or deconstructed, then it's like this kind of center point in your perception kind of falls away. So it's not just thinking, right? It's more than thinking. It's experiential, immersive experience. So that's one. The second one is that at some point there's a shift in one's identity. So I think with the emptiness thread, this comes pretty early on, as Sabina, you were saying, seeing through the construct of the self, seeing that the self is a thought, not a thing. So then who am I? Am I this awareness? Am I this empty space? Is there no self? These are possible options that arise, at once one's ordinary sense of self gets destabilized or falls away. So we're not necessarily looking for the shift in identity to land in a certain place, but just kind of, I think a feature of awakening is that there will be a shift in identity. And then another feature of awakening is it's a worldview change, a change in the way that you understand reality, a change in the way that you understand what is real, or how do I recognize what's real. And so with emptiness thread, it's the seeing through of these concepts is a shift in, seeing, oh, they're illusory. These concepts are not as real as I thought they were. So I'm looking for those three things to define an awakening. Um, but I suppose these three aspects could also be shifting in somebody that you're talking about, Yvonne, somebody who's having like a mental health crisis, depersonalization, derealization disorder, or some other kind of mental health crisis. So how do we help people to kind of distinguish between awakening and psychological, um, you know, crisis? What do you like? How do you screen for that, Yvonne, or how do you help people through, making the discernment between awakening and something that's more problematic?
Actually, because I'm not a therapist, I usually tell people to stop the process and check in with a therapist first, because if I can feel like they're not stable, the way they talk, usually you can hear. You need stability. You need like a groundedness in your system and your body. You need a regulated nervous system. You need stability in your system to face emptiness, or the concept of no, or to look through the concepts. And usually people who are more in a mental crisis, they are confused, they don't feel well, their bodies often have issues, and you can see like they first need to stabilize the system, and it's kind of a paradox. And the best thing I heard about it is you first need to have a healthy self in order to deconstruct the self. So when there is a sense of there is no healthy self, there is too much going on here, like in the human system. I usually don't work with these people, but I send them to a therapist first, or to a doctor, or whatever is needed for them, and to tell them to come back later. And I do that because I didn't do it in my own process. I did everything on my own. And when I felt that I was feeling this like depersonalization and derealization, I digged deeper because I thought, I'm on the right track. Let's go there. And it felt like really, it felt phenomenologically, it felt, I guess, similar to what I read in the books and what I heard people talk about. The thing is that, yeah, by deconstructing more and more, I ended up that I needed really help. And so I didn't stop. And this is why I know how it feels, and this is why I tell people usually stop here, get yourself settled, and then come back.
Yeah, I second that absolutely. And also like uh, for me, it's I get a sense often then when people are dissociated, they feel like balloons floating up in thin air, and they're not connected to the body, and their life is more becoming more and more dysfunctional, instead of, even there can be, loops and hoops in the road. But if in the long run it stabilizes, maybe it's just a short phase. But if it's not, then yeah, absolutely take a break and, find some guidance somewhere else.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. I think these are important kind of caveats and warnings before we, get too far into the territory of the emptiness thread. Yeah. So I agree with what you all are saying. None of us here are psychologists, psychiatrists, so we don't have the expertise to diagnose, disorders or anything like that. But yeah, I would say, um, for me, I would say if somebody's feeling off, if somebody's feeling, um, unbalanced, or somebody's feeling like something's not quite right about their experiences, that should definitely look into having some therapeutic support. So let's assume that we're talking about somebody who's you know, wants to deepen into or wants to open this thread and deepen into it, and that they have come to this practice from a place of um, stability and a place of genuine curiosity and interest, and they're gonna kind of intentionally move into the emptiness thread. Um, I mentioned in terms of practices that are commonly suggested by traditions in order to do this, in order to open the thread and deepen the thread. I mentioned Buddhism, mentioned Advaita Vedanta, and both of these traditions. I mean, Buddhism's a whole family of traditions, so there's tons of different approaches within just that one framework. But you know, primarily, I think across the board, we have essentially two different kinds of um, practices. I would say one is meditation, meaning like formal, seated, structured meditation practice, and another one is self-inquiry, which is more of like a kind of an investigation, you could say. And I think in terms of the meditation practices, there's a whole range of them, but some of the primary approaches are concentration practices. So really focusing very closely, very in minute detail on certain kinds of phenomena, um, trying to really see clearly, really capture, like under a microscope, every moment of your experience and really look into, whether it is appearing, whether it actually is as it appears to be. Um, then there's Buddhist practices that are a little bit more like inquiry based, which is I'm thinking of things like vipassana. Oh, I should say, so concentration meditation, I'm thinking of things like jhana meditation, for example. I'm thinking of noting practices, for example, um, breath oriented meditations, sensory fields, kind of observing the different kinds of sensations coming in. And then we have more inquiry-based meditations in Buddhism that are like vipassana practices, where you're really investigating things and applying a certain way of thinking, looking at, the impermanence of all things, let's say, or you could look at how all perceptions are causing suffering would be another approach. Um, and then you have sort of the Advaita version of inquiry practice, which is, who am I? What am I? What is this thing that I call I? And really, really targeting the sense of self as the object of inquiry. So these are kind of like, I guess, very basic, kind of commonly known emptiness style practices that, come from those two traditions. And then there's lots of other kinds of practices. And for some people, it just kind of happens spontaneously that they kind of fall into this for some reason or another, that they fall into this territory. So I'm curious, the two of you, what practices you were doing, if any, or what your kind of triggers were for opening up the emptiness thread. Um, what was it that kind of did it for you?
Yeah, I never had a real structured meditation practice. And so I would say the emptiness thread rather sneaked up upon me. Uh, but what I would say, what helps people when they start, and not everybody is like the self-inquiry type, um, is like finding the gap between the opposites. I was doing that for many years, finding this place of neutrality and which kind of like diminished reactivity a lot. And then when the mind is not jumping on each and every thought, it was much easier to go into inquiry later. But I never did formal meditation. And when the emptiness thread opened, I would say it was a shift in perception first. And it came sneaked into a big shift of oneness and energy. And what it did was like uh, influencing how the other two threads were experienced in that shift. It gave everything this translucent and transparent and kind of like hollowed out, empty touch. So that's how that can happen too. And it took away like distinct form or borders of the body and even the sense of space and dimension. It was clearly something beyond or prior to dimension. And so some people are just kind of like tumble in there without knowing. And yeah, so that's how it started here. And yeah.
Yeah, so same for me. No formal meditation. I can't tell anything about that. Um, it's really hard to tell because when you just shared, Pierce, about what emptiness is, and you said, well, you see that the world's not as real as you think, and you realize, oh, maybe the self is not what I thought. That's been my experience since a very young age. So I have no clue if that has already been emptiness, but to me, the world never seemed real in the first place, not like for others. And I guess I'm one of these people that, due to severe childhood trauma, never really created a self. Like myself was always very fragmented. So there was this starting point of maybe already starting with a bit of emptiness. I don't know. And my first real conscious contact with emptiness happened with a book, which I lately learned many people stepped into emptiness through that book. So I'm making some promotion now. It's Jad McKenna's first book, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnest Thing, where he explicitly explains self-inquiry in a very radical way, and you do it on your own. And I'm a very radical person, so I did it on my own on daily basis for a few months. And this is when I ended up, I had a shift in perception, sense of self and worldview, and but they were all informed by my trauma, which means I ended up in depersonalization, derealization, and the world just faded out for me in my perception. And now when I look back to it, I'd say it's been emptiness, but it was covered by the trauma that was still in the psyche. So I couldn't really deal with it. And my system just stopped the emptiness thread. It opened and then it got stopped immediately because there was no way to holding it. And so for a very long period, I went to the psyche thread. I worked on trauma. I did a lot of psyche thread stuff. And then emptiness came back through diet meditation, which is another form of self-inquiry done in pairs, where you ask the question, tell me who you are. And I did that for a few years actually. And it was like layer after layer after layer was it's like digging for a fountain. You just layer by layer by layer, you go deeper until you found water. And in this case, you find emptiness. And that's a very beautiful approach because it's done in pairs. So you're co-regulating your system, which supports your system to stay stable while you're deconstructing concepts and reality. That to me has been a very, yeah, nourishing practice for emptiness, actually.
Yeah, great. Um, but I'm loving the way that each person among the three of us has a different story and a different kind of experience and different ways that this thread kind of blended with other things. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with the two of you about each of these threads instead of just me kind of going into, my own experiences, because that would give you just kind of a one-dimensional sense of what this thread can be all about. So yeah, thank you for sharing those details.
You want to share yours? We didn't hear
Yeah,
your
I
emptiness
was going to,
experience.
yeah. So yeah, so my case is a lot more kind of like structured and intentional. So, long standing experiences with and practice of Buddhist style meditation. In my case, 20 years worth of exposure to Vipassana meditation and mindfulness meditation and some other things within a Buddhist framework. So, and also lots of familiarity with Buddhist ideas about emptiness and about non-self, and for my in my professional life, I have I work with Buddhist ideas and teachings and so forth a lot. So I was very familiar with Buddhism's position on all of this and sort of the goals of the meditation practice, but was never very adept or very accomplished at meditation myself. I was never able to really sort of like focus my attention for very long, and always struggled with that. Although I did, some pretty intensive retreats for many years, I never really felt like I was kind of getting it from meditation practice, and I was. In retrospect, I would say I was working on other threads. There were other things that were happening. Sort of a very slow, um, very slow kind of deepening happening in other ways. But in terms of the emptiness thread, just really kind of no personal experience. Maybe philosophically I understood, the Buddhist concepts, but no personal experiential um shifts like what I would say would define an awakening. And then one day I encountered the headless way exercises, which, if people aren't familiar with those, they're really kind of even they're sort of goofy. They're sort of their vibe is a little bit like playful and kind of childlike and very different than Buddhist, serious Buddhist philosophy in terms of the way that they language things and the way that they're approaching things. And I think it was because of that difference, because it was just like a completely different language and a completely different vibe, um, that it somehow was able to like cut through in a way that more Buddhist teachings weren't able to do for me. And so yeah, so I was literally driving in my car on the way home from work one day, listening to the sort of spokesperson for Headless Way. His name is Richard Lang. He was just kind of like going through the exercises, talking about them, and as I'm driving, I'm following along with what he's saying to do. And it was like a 5 minute introduction, or maybe 10 minutes at the most, of a silly little guided exercise in Headless Way. And I was driving, and I had like this intense kind of like snap um, into what they call a headless kind of perception. Um, and it was something that I had to, because I was driving, I had to sort of shake it off and say like, no, I whatever that was, I can't, it was really, really interesting, but I can't focus on it because I need to drive. So I drove myself. I was going to the gym on my way home. So I got to the gym. I went in the sauna at the gym. I was like, okay, what was that again? And I sort of like did the exercise again, and it kind of snapped back into place again. And it was very intense and very clear to me that this was uh, an experience that I had read about in Buddhist texts, that I'd heard about for a very long time, but to have it actually occur to me in person, I was like, wow, this is. It kind of seemed like the things that I had heard other people describe. I'd always thought they were metaphorical, but it was actually like it was actually um, an accurate description of what it actually felt like or looks like. So it was to me, it was kind of like um, the disappearance of the central organizing principle or center point that kind of like holds together reality. It was clear that that sort of like that there had been like a me in the middle of reality that was sort of like making sense out of everything, and that kind of just dropped away, and reality sort of like broke up into little bubbles of perception. So like, hearing the sound was here, this vision was over here, this other, body sensation was over there, and it just pop, 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 pop with no kind of like centralized um, cohesion, and no self to be found anywhere. And Yeah, it lasted for a little bit and then it kind of faded away, but that was kind of a powerful enough experience that it sort of set this trajectory in motion. Um, yeah,
I just
so
jump in and say, don't
yeah,
drive
please.
when you do these exercises. Not to you,
No.
yours already happened, but to everyone else listening, don't. It's
Yeah,
like I think what really happened with the internet and all the access we have now, the exercises are powerful. Like you know best, Pierce, right? In the traditions, some you have to have an initiation before you even are allowed to do the exercises or to get them. They don't show them to you if you don't are in their community. So there is a reason because they are powerful. I mean, they are powerful tools, and it's not. And with the internet, sometimes it seems like it's everyone does it. I can do it. No, of course I can. But you really like we don't know what happens in the brain, but something must happen in the brain or even in the psyche. They break down things that you usually need to be functional in the world.
yeah, yeah. That's absolutely true. I think so. So one thing is this sort of cornucopia of practices that are available to people is amazing because I'm an example of somebody who was really trying to get somewhere with a certain set of practices that wasn't getting anywhere with it, but then suddenly this other practice that's coming from a totally different context, you know, I listened to it once for a couple minutes and boom, right? I'm having the experience. So just the access that we have to this wide range of different practices in the modern period is amazing because I'm convinced there's something for everybody. There's some kind of practice that will open this up for probably everybody. You just have to find the right practice, and you might have to work at it for a while. And maybe that practice did it for me because I had so much experience with other things. Like who knows? But I just think the amount of access is amazing. Um, but yeah, you're pointing to the flip side of it, which is these experiences. It can be subtle, it can be gradual, but for many of us, it's also it can be it can feel like you broke your brain, um, and whether and how long it takes to put your brain back together, might differ from person to person. So yeah, I did have a hard time driving for a little while after that happened. Yeah, because some perceptual things were hard to put back together. I had like two-dimensional vision for a long time after that, just sort of like having to figure out how to those pieces that got disaggregated, how to recohere reality into three-dimensional space and objects, so I could drive safely. It took a little while. Um,
Yeah, I had that too, and I couldn't say any longer how fast I was driving or the distances. And I also had like injuries, hurting myself when trying to get through the door because I couldn't estimate how far and how wide things are. So yeah, can be quite bumpy at times. And
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And as this, so, as this thread deepens, um, either because you're doing more practices and you're continuing to intentionally apply the insight of emptiness or the insight of this process of deconstruction, you're perhaps intentionally applying that to more and more objects, to more and more things. Or maybe it just sort of like takes on a life of its own and just kind of starts almost spontaneously just deconstructing things. It can happen differently for people. Um, how much effort you're putting into this and how intentionally you are doing this varies from person to person. Um, in my case, I saw that first taste and knew it was something I wanted to pursue more, and so I started doing structured, practice time, like taking specific time out of my day, to do these headless weight exercises, and eventually I reintroduced some Buddhist style observation of phenomena again. So I at a certain point was doing up to 2 hours a day of this kind of emptiness focused meditation. So I was very um, again, because I came from a Buddhist background and had sort of like the framework and understanding of the practices and had already done a lot of the practices and sort of had that whole way of doing things in my mind already. That's the direction I went in. Um, but yeah, deepening would be kind of realizing the emptiness or the illusory nature or seeing through or deconstructing more and more and more of reality bit by bit or kind of all at once depending on how it happens. So what was your, I mean, I feel like you both already talked a little bit about kind of the deepening of the trajectory, but what what would what, what would you say was your experience with kind of the direction of the thread once it opened?
I would say since for me it started with like form and space falling away or uh, mm, not representing reality or whatever. When it deepened, then for me came the phase of like seeing through concepts, um, seeing that thoughts don't mean anything uh, other than if I give them any, if I believe in them or act upon them, and or thoughts then suddenly stopping and the feeling of everything standing still and this feeling of like nothing was ever created that came actually later, and some people have that right in the beginning, so it doesn't have to be sequential in any way. And then the sense of self really, for me, thinned out later, almost unnoticed, until it felt funny to say I did that. So also agency faded kind of like out and became a feeling of impersonality, and also motivation and personal will just completely flattened. It was just gone, which was quite uh, quite dramatic for me because first of all, I didn't know this was awakening or that this was an emptiness thread. And I was always a goal-driven person. And so there was no way to go anywhere any longer. So I kind of like did it the other way around. And that took years actually until like the subject object collapse happened. So where really the center fell out. Um, yeah. But the first entry was like very into the formless spheres, and then like rewiring the whole thing and starting from scratch with the concepts. But I never did this intentionally. It just was a process that was running on its own. I never had a feeling I can do anything or I have a say in this. It's quite of without option in a way. And only when I realized that it was awakening and it had something to do with emptiness, I started doing a little bit of practice around subject object, and that was more Advaita-based style, or just open inquiries that would jump at me that I would tag along with me throughout the day or even the night. So it was quite all over the place.
Hmm. Yeah, same for me. I mean, it's hard to even reconstruct the past. I'm making up things now, right? I have no idea if any of this is true or if there's any causality, but what when I look back is what how it looks like is that, as I said before, emptiness seemed to be here very naturally and was covered by a lot of trauma. And so when I was working with my trauma and with the psyche thread, basically, suddenly emptiness was naturally back again because it could, yeah, have like a safe space in my system without collapsing. And I didn't, like Sabina said, I didn't even notice that something changed. But to me, it was pretty normal. There is no time. I never had a good sense of time anyway. And so many things were very natural to me. I didn't question them until yeah, like Sabina as well said, met people who put them into boxes and that, oh, this is emptiness, this is this is that. I'm like, oh, okay. This is just how I live. There was no re not really, yeah, there was not really knowing about what was going on. Um, and only at the pretty at the end of the process, I met someone who does the 10 feathers. And the interesting thing, I went just through the feathers to see what's left. Whenever I touched into the feather work, which is an emptiness inquiry, I ended up in a different thread. So emptiness was always like a starting point to end up in a different thread. I would inquire into feather 4 and 5 and end up in the psyche thread. I would inquire into feather 7 and end up in the energy thread. So it was kind of like the emptiness was always like something to start with, but then never really ended in emptiness. And that was kind of interesting to me. And I can just tell the story because I know your model now. I didn't know back then. It was not like that, oh, yeah, this is emptiness and now I'm in energy. No, no, no. It's just now looking backwards that I can kind of tell a bit more what it was about. And are we going down to the end? I can tell the end of the thread. Are we
Well,
waiting?
look, before we do that, I just want to jump in and say, like, I love that story about, yeah, I mean, first of all, the Fetters work that's a great model for kind of inquiry into emptiness. And essentially, so I have this guiding question for each one of the threads, and the guiding question I think kind of captures the whole movement of the thread, or and it's like the central inquiry of the thread, the way that I word it. And for the emptiness thread, it's something like, is what still seems to be real, and is it actually so? So whatever it is that kind of is in your experience that seems to be real, looking at it, investigating it, to what extent is this a product of my concepts, a product of my thoughts, really kind of like looking closely and investigating that thing, and seeing how under investigation it collapses, it is seen through, it is deconstructed. And I think the Fetters, we're talking about Kevin Shanelek's Fetters work, I think. That is a sort of a list of kind of 10 it directs that guiding question to kind of progressively deeper levels, 10 levels of analysis. So it's a great, I think it's a great kind of practical application of my guiding questions. But um, I think your story really points to the tangles of these threads, the way that the way that in the Multidharma model, I'm talking about kind of threads braiding together. It's like first you're in one thread and it kind of like gives way to another thread or provokes another thread. And these threads are kind of twisted together in weird and idiosyncratic ways. Maybe your experience of that braiding is different than Sabina's or mine, but we all experience some kind of twisting together, blending together of these threads. And it's what I think makes awakening uniquely individual, and it also what makes it kind of like difficult to square my own process with somebody else's process or some text that describe the process or so forth, because that braiding is tends to be so unique. So in your case, Yvonne, every time you tried to find emptiness, you wound up on a different thread. Somebody else's case, maybe, those are twisted together differently. Yeah, so in my case, I had a kind of after this initial discovery of this non-self, this space, this kind of like um, disaggregated kind of no center to experience sort of thing that I was describing. I tend to have these like very powerful experiences and then kind of fades, and then I do a lot of practice in order to like kind of gradually sink into that reality. So it's a little bit like four steps ahead and then three steps back and then slowly step back to where I had been. So it's like some big dramatic experience followed by like a period of digestion and kind of slow in progress. So yeah, so it took me, I had that one experience, and then it probably like took like several months to kind of really digest it and really kind of like make that the new normal way of seeing, um, and then for me, the experience of, there's no self, there's no middle, but there's still where these perceptions arising. There's sound, there's body sensation, there's vision, um, arising, as I said, like little bubbles of perception arising within a space that had no center. So I didn't have the kind of experience that a lot of people have at that point, which is that they see like a container for all of the experience, and they call that container awareness. And they say like I am awareness, and all of these perceptions are arising in awareness. I didn't have that, and it's probably because of my Buddhist background that just kind of like the sense of self dropped out, and there was no kind of container. It just was like there's just perception, happening. There's just things happening with um, no seer, no hearer, no feeler. Um, so I didn't have this kind of like I am awareness moment, but I definitely said like there is no self, right? That was how it felt to me early on. And Sabina, you said that came later, right? Towards the end. So anyway, I'm just trying to point out the real individual differences, even between three people here, in terms of both how the braiding happens, but then also how the progression or the depth or which concepts fall first, is very, very unique and different from person to person.
Yeah, with the braiding, I would say like the emptiness thread was the last one to come on here with me. And when it came on, it took the lead in a way. So other than what Yvonne said, it was like um, it would every time it came really into the forefront, it would deconstruct everything else. So it would tear down the whole house. There was a crescendo happening with like oneness and psyche and energy, and boom comes the emptiness thread, and poof, it's all gone. So and it really took the lead till the end, actually. And I didn't see that one coming. Of course not. Yeah. So it's been very different. And then, oh yeah, I also had like very, very intense shifts happening, but there was not like a trailing back. It was not so much a back and forth. Whenever they happened, there was no going back. A split second, and from then on, things were totally different. Like first shift, the body is gone and never came back. When I was in that field of awareness for 10 years straight. And then just reading a book, just reading one word, and boom, it was gone. Never came back. So it was always very radical in a way. Yeah, very distinct. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Um, so I do want to talk about kind of the moving down deeper into the bottom of this thread. Then we'll come back and talk about integration and how it kind of like combines with other threads. But just to stay on the kind of the emptiness trajectory, you know, um, uh, most people will experience some kind of braiding, some kind of integration, but just to like sort of like hold it out and just talk about the emptiness trajectory itself. Um, we've talked about some pretty big concepts falling away. You said, Sabina, the boundaries of the body falling away, right? Seeing that as just conceptual. You said time and space; those are major kind of landmarks in the trajectory of the emptiness thread. Like at some point, time is seen as being a construct, space is seen as being a construct, the self, obviously, as a construct. Really kind of like basic features of reality that your mind uses to assemble reality into something, coherent, falling away. Um, I'm describing kind of perception bubbles is one way of languaging what you're left with. Other people describe it differently, I'm sure. But when I say that there's like a bubble of perception, like say, there's something that's being heard, there's no hearer that's hearing it. There's just like the thing that is being heard, that seems to be there. So applying the guiding question, you could say, at that point, what seems real is sound. Sound seems to be arising, and so then the guiding question, would have you turn towards that and say, well, is that actually so? And yeah, I created the guiding questions in retrospect, to kind of, help to explain what I mean, by deepening down a thread. But I think for me, there was a clear moment where, um, you know, the perception that seemed to be arising, it turned towards that, and that itself kind of dissolved or couldn't really be found. So, you know, there's even the perceptions themselves are only seemingly happening, can't really be pinned down, can't really be said to have arisen. And so at that point, I entered into kind of a way of perceiving where it's kind of like everything just seems like dreamlike or like holographic or like, insubstantial. All perceptions, all objects are just kind of like not really there, kind of not really being able to be apprehended fully. So I think you mentioned, Sabina, that might have happened earlier for you. Like, I think that was a little bit later for me. They're just kind of like a ghost-like, mirage-like world of things that aren't really. They're just kind of like gone before you can find them, right? You turn towards everything and it's just disappearing right out from under you. Um, and and somehow eventually, you know, uh, again, different people experiencing different things at different speeds, but somewhere in this emptiness thread, there's the place where kind of like all reality just just disappears, and you're either left with, some people will say, just pure consciousness and with no objects, and other people will just say it's like a blackout, like a cessation of consciousness altogether. Um, and yeah, is there something to talk about there that comes to mind for either one of you, with just kind of like the deep end of the emptiness thread?
Well, first, again, it's, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I find that interesting because the sequence can be so different.
Yeah.
And for me, there's like just phenomena arising and then them not even being tangible any longer happened very late in the process when this after the background consciousness, like the field or whatever, or the ground of being had dropped out, there was this mechanism, I would say, in the foreground, stitching together experience or phenomena and putting it into a continuity, and also like moderating it or giving it a sense of, yeah, maybe last bit of control. I don't know, very subtle. And when that was seen through, then it was, like you said, these of just phenomena like boom, 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 and then turning towards them, they wouldn't even be like able to fixate them or even localize them or um, turning into something because there was just nothing, like smoke and mirrors. Yeah, but that came for me later on, almost to the end. Yeah, and cessation, I had them too. Yeah, not often, but a couple of times.
Hmm. To me, it was like also only backwards I can say what happened. I described this to a friend, and he told me that sounds like jhanas and cessation, and I never heard about it because I don't have a Buddhist background. But that's something that happened. I don't know why. I didn't deconstruct by, I didn't force myself to deconstruct something. I basically what I did every day, I would lay down for 10 minutes to have a quick nap. And what happened there first was there was nothing except presence. So presence was still there, but there was nothing appearing in presence. And then one day even presence was gone. So there was just what you said, blackout. There was nothing. And then on a retreat, I would do a deepening session. And I wasn't even interested because I was already done with spirituality. I was like, okay, I sit down here, who cares? But then I was gone completely, and I realized it only when I came back, because when I was gone, there was no one noticing that I was gone because there was nothing. It's hard to describe. But when there was like a coming back into this, realizing where have I been? I could feel like this was really shocking to the system again because it was kind of frightening to have the experience of not existing. And you can question who realized that you didn't exist. As I said, it could just say it afterwards. It was really a weird experience, and I was glad I had already some people with context around me because I didn't have context before that. But to me, that was the deep end. I mean, that's not even emptiness was there. There was just nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean we're describing things, you could spend years describing every kind of, subtle nuance of this kind of process that we're talking about here. I think it's good just to kind of give a brief kind of sense of the sorts of things that people could experience in, in whatever order, in whatever languaging that they're doing within whatever tradition, using whatever practices. Of course, there's going to be differences, and something structured like jhana practice is going to be more step by step by step. Or it's just totally out of control, like um, runaway awakening process, that Sabina, that you were talking about. It could be, um, it could be so different between different people. I think the ultimate kind of end point of the emptiness thread, however you're going down this thread, is some version of everything is gone, even the whatever presence or viewer or awareness or whatever consciousness, whatever subject could be there to tell you that everything's gone or to see that everything's gone, that itself is also gone. And so there's nothing that can be said about about the experience of being gone because there anything that could have an experience, any experience to be had whatsoever is gone. And also, Sabina, you mentioned like the ground of being or the ground. There's no ground. Like the ground is also gone. There's no kind of fundamental underlying, um, frame or container or, um, you know, entity or being of any kind. Everything is just, it's just gone, 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 goner than gone. Um, However somebody languages that, however they experience, however they choose to talk about, that will differ, but that's the bottom of the emptiness thread, where just, the guiding question, what seems to be real and is it actually so, has been answered. There's absolutely nothing left to ask that question of because everything is gone. um, Yeah, so I don't know. Any final thoughts on kind of the trajectory before we talk about integration and release?
I would say one distinct um, part of the emptiness thread is also like this ending of the sense of existing, because to me it has like this process of seeing through a self is like not only the narrative self and then like the subject, and then it still can remain like a sense of existence even though you see there is no narrative self or whatever. And with that fallen, this is really like a point of not going back. That's at least how I experienced it. And so this it has different flavors along the way of what the self is or is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I and actually you mentioned fear a minute ago, or was it Yvonne? I can't remember, but one of you mentioned fear, and I do think that might be worth underlining right there because there is, I think for most people, like some kind of reaction in the system, in the mind and the body, as you're getting towards the deep end of the emptiness thread. There's some kind of intense, sometimes intense physical reaction to this. I had like I thought I was gonna have a heart attack right on the spot. My heart was pounding as I was approaching the dropping away of the ground and the cessations and all that. And yeah, it can be pretty terrifying. So.
Mhm. Yeah, to me it was like watching myself die in slow motion, and just the second last bit you're holding on to, and the second it's gone, it's just poof, and then yeah.
And it is a death, right? I mean, there is like a letting go that has to happen. Um, that is a certain kind of death. I mean, it's certainly the mind, the ego, the whatever, the system perceives this as death. Yeah. Um, yeah. So okay, so we've just been talking about the emptiest thread sort of like in and of itself, but we've mentioned braiding, which is kind of like the oscillation between emptiness and other things. Like Yvonne, you were saying you went and you looked for emptiness and landed in the psyche thread, or you looked for emptiness and landed in the energy thread. But at some point, for those of us who have more than one thread um, that's active, and I do think that's most people, but at some point it's not just about braiding, which is just about oscillation between the threads, but there is some kind of integration that needs to happen, right? Some kind of move towards, okay, yes, I see that there's no ground, that there's no self, that time and space and everything else is a an empty concept. I can see that perception doesn't even happen. Nothing arises, nothing could ever arise. But yet, still, um, I have to go to work. I have to feed myself, and sometimes that disjuncture is difficult for people. Like some people they fall really hard into emptiness and really lose track of daily life and the body and kind of ordinary activities for a while. But eventually this kind of integration takes place. Maybe intentionally because somebody works on it. Maybe it just happens with the maturation of the spiritual process. But yeah, so I don't know. You both seem like you had very different experiences with integration, and I know that you coach people or assist people, guide people with this process as well. So yeah, what do you think is important to underline for folks about integration with daily life and ordinary? I mean, there is no body, but yet you have a body, don't you, Sabina? Right? Like there, how do you help people to kind of square multiple realities being true at the same time or multiple
Mm.
threads?
Mm. Yeah, well, for me, it was like daily life was from the beginning was very braided into it. I had only very short phases or where I felt dissociated or nihilism or whatever, where I didn't feel like functional. But I would say this was the daily life was in the game from the beginning. And so I don't have like particular approaches to that because integration to me happened while I was working and not on the side. And it automatically took the daily life thread on board. But I know that Yvonne has, this is one of her specialities.
Hmm. I actually can't remember. I don't even know what happened after the cessation thing happened. It's somehow what I remember is there has been this kaleidoscope of everything is empty and full at the same time, everything is love and empty at the same time. I remember that to be the case for a while. And I think the thing is, I didn't try to, what some traditions recommend is to fixate the state. I didn't have the idea I need to stick now to emptiness. This is the state I need to stabilize in. It happened, it was seen through, and then life just went on, basically. Um, I didn't really bother because, yeah, because maybe because when you are in traditions and this is the goal and you're finally at the goal and then you like make something out of nothing, basically, in this case. And I didn't really care. So it just went back on whatever was on the table. I think oneness was there again, and then dropping the thread somewhere along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You sort of discovered or spontaneously kind of it happened that what I think in Buddhism is sometimes referred to as the emptiness of emptiness. It's like the fixation on emptiness, the kind of the need for things to be empty, the kind of the focus on that as the right view, as the most important perspective. At some point, just kind of like is also seen as being empty, right? So is also seen through, the need to have this perspective is just a concept, and that falls away. So you kind of like spontaneously discovered that for yourself instead of having that be, like a teaching that you needed to be told. Maybe because yeah, like you said, you didn't have the doctrine there in the first place. So yeah, that's great. I think for me, I was more like Sabina. I was um, while all this was going on, I had young children, so there was, and it always for me there was always like a very clear, ethical kind of, it was never in question that I was going to get so absorbed into spirituality that I wouldn't show up for my family. So that and obviously I had a job and other responsibilities that I was doing every day too. So it would be like, I'd be down in the basement doing this like really intense, emptiness meditation, having like all kinds of, cessations and everything falling away and, nothing is real and so on and so forth. And then come upstairs and cook dinner for my kids and eat dinner and ask how their day was at school and, some drama with their friends or whatever and be totally there, right? Totally present. So I feel like that kind of like the presence of my family, not to mention work and other kinds of real world responsibilities, I think kept me on a continuous kind of integration path right from the beginning, like you were saying, Sabina. So
Mhm.
this wasn't in, months long retreats or something where you could really just go out into outer space and then have to do an intensive reintegration. This was kind of bits and pieces of integration all along.
Yeah, I love that. Same here. None of my clients knew what I was going through because I had an appointment. I would show up, do my work, and then boom, nothing.
Yeah. Even
Or
though time doesn't exist, you would still show up on time and
yeah, they never noticed anything. And then I had my disabled mother and her dying process. So uh, they were so totally intertwined with that. So yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, great.
And one thing I want to say is that many people I heard when you report about cessation, they say, but who is the one that's coming back and reporting about cessation? And who is the one who's making dinner if there's no one? Who is the one, who is caring for a disabled mom? And that is an interesting question because if you haven't had the experience, you can't really know. But I mean, this is where you really can only see this is the concept, right? There is no self, but that doesn't mean, I think that's another thing we didn't mention yet, that there is nothing. It's just there is no self. That like there is no inherent nature in things, but what's still running is conditioning, is body doing stuff, and these kind of things happen even though they're empty. Does this sound weird now? I don't know.
I mean, that's the central paradox that
Yeah.
that integration is all about is um the way I would say it is that question, who is coming back and reporting if there is no self, is demanding that we create and adhere to concepts as accurate representations of reality, right? That the concepts themselves have an ontology built into them. Who is reporting on what happened, right, is demanding that we create a concept of a self that can report or to say that this self does not exist categorically, and so it like pushes us into a yes or no position. And that is the way language works. That is the way kind of concepts work. But that's precisely what you've seen through by virtue of the emptiness thread. So at this point, right, when you've had this deep taste of emptiness and somebody says, who is it that is reporting on that? There's no answer. You just shrug your shoulders and say, you know, I don't know. Like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to ask the question. Certainly
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to try to answer it.
Yeah, because we assume that there has to be a separate someone noticing or witnessing or perceiving. And, it's just all one flow, it's just not separate from whatever's happening. And so, but people think if there's no self, then there's, like Yvonne said, there's nothing. So that's just not the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like everything continues as normal, just without the concept of self and the experience of that concept, everything just kind of proceeds as it was, right? I mean, the food gets cooked, the kids get cared for, the clients get healed, the money gets uh deposited into the bank account, right? The schedule gets made, like everything continues to happen. Um, although some people do feel a little bit of de de destability, instability, maybe a little bit of dissociation, a little bit of kind of like, how can I live now? You know, some people do experience that initially. It eventually, so I think, sorts itself out in this integration process. So Yvonne, you already hinted towards the other kind of integration that the Multidharma model talks about, which is the integration of the threads with one another, like the spiritual threads with one another, and starting to see, you know, at a certain point, if you have more than one thread going, you start to see like, oh, all of reality seems to be totally empty and just illusory and meaningless, but meanwhile, on the oneness thread, I'm seeing everything is divine and everything is sacred. And meanwhile, on the energy thread, I'm seeing that everything is energetic. Meanwhile, on the psyche thread, I'm seeing that everything is like, you know, projected mental conditioning and mental construction. And so as these threads all kind of are deepening, it's sort of not only things are empty and also daily life happens, but all of these kind of perspectives get woven together somehow so that it's like, yeah, everything is empty and non-existent, but also somehow it's all one, and also somehow it's all energetic, and so also somehow it is all kind of mind produced, and all of those perspectives kind of are seen as being simultaneously true and can't really separate out, you know, or deny. They don't need to negate one another. They can all sort of be there simultaneously. And this is something that different traditions articulate really differently. You know, Buddhism has its way of talking about, you know, emptiness is form, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, or samsara and nirvana being the same thing. You know, there's kind of particular language in Buddhism for this, but um, yeah, you know, Taoism has this kind of like non-dual language also. There's lots of different ways of talking about this. Shiva Shakti, for example. There's different ways of kind of pointing to this in different traditions. But I'm just curious, like from your own experience, your own way of languaging, like what what would you say this was like for you?
I only remember that um, I stumbled across the Heart Sutra. I heard about it somewhere. And it was one day that I listened to a instrumental version of the Heart Sutra, and it was not just words, it was the felt experience. And for me, this was like, oh my God, it's real. It's not just they're saying it, it sounds beautiful and mysterious. No, it's actually my experience. And I remember that very vividly because, yeah, it was a very touching song and it was the words of the Heart Sutra in the original language, by the way, which I don't understand, but something was kind of landing here. And yeah, it's a great paradox which you can't really understand with the mind. How can something be form and not form at the same time? It doesn't make any sense. It's something that you can only experience in your felt sense.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was alluding to that earlier when I was like, when I first had this experience of emptiness, it was like, oh, they meant it literally. I always thought it was just like a nice little metaphor, but they meant it literally. Yeah. So this too, right? This is a, yeah, they meant it literally. It somehow doesn't make any sense, but somehow is experientially real. Yeah.
Yeah, I experienced it like a multidimensionality. When I
Yeah.
was working, I really felt like a cosmic dancer and seamlessly sliding through different experiences, which were not different in a way. And yeah, I felt this was completely normal. So it wasn't like, okay, this is something, what does that mean? It was like, yeah, this is how it is. And I felt that it was great. It was very extraordinary in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, in other videos we talk about integration in more depth, and that's really um, because it involves all the threads. It's really something that's more, it's better talked about in kind of a multi-thread way than just focusing on this. In this video, we're focusing on emptiness, so maybe we can point people to other presentations of that. And we also have other videos about the releasing process, but maybe we can just kind of finish up here by talking about the release of the emptiness thread. So, um, just briefly, people aren't familiar with the concept of releasing. So the idea here is that, once the perspectives of a particular thread become so kind of second nature, they're just so well known and so familiar and so integrated into one's life, then um, there often isn't a need to really keep again and again, like checking to see if things are empty. If things have been seen to be empty, if um, the subject and the object have both kind of been seen through and both have been found to be empty and both, but also have been found to be integrated and totally compatible with everyday life and also with all the other spiritual perspectives, the other threads. Um, there may not be a need to hold that perspective and, you know, do all this meditation in order to experience it all the time and to really kind of like separate it out from everything and really hold it up as something that, needs to be cultivated and continuously reinforced. And so for a lot of us, I mean, many traditions do want you to do that. Um, but there are traditions, and I think in all of the three of us, in all of our experience, what happened was just sort of a relaxing around this, the need to see things as empty. Kind of the emptiness of emptiness taken to its logical, conclusion is just, uh, yeah, things are empty, and so it is, and so it's kind of doesn't need to really be an object of um, clinging to seeing things empty, and it can just be let go. Um, and so releasing means just sort of like relaxing your grip on this particular viewpoint and just allowing yourself, your experience, just allowing things to naturally arise and be empty or be not, or not, as the case may be, and not really sort of be attached to a particular perspective on that things must be empty. I don't know. What would you all add, or how would you say it?
Yeah, I can just repeat what I said. Like, yeah, emptiness was empty itself, and just completely lost interest in doing anything with it. That's exactly what happened to me.
But not like a rejection. It's not like
No, it
a
just
like
was
a
like, yeah, okay, I've seen it. I mean, what else could there be? It's just, it's done.
yeah, yeah.
So no, it
I
wasn't a rejection of it. It was just done. There was no, it wasn't, it was like if you found your keys, you don't have to search for your keys, right? You don't have to
yeah.
go and search for them if you have them. So there was
I
no
I
need
like
to
to
go for search.
I like to compare it to a body part. So it's like, when you're a baby, you discovered your belly button and you like
Yeah.
touched it and you were like, oh my God, look at this. It's so interesting. And now like how often do you think, oh, I have a belly button? Like you don't really spend any time thinking about it. It just is, it just is
Yeah.
the way it is.
In a
Yeah.
very natural way, actually. Yeah.
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 Hmm. Yeah, to me, it was towards the end, I was doing feather work and to clean
Oh, you
up,
both did better. So.
yeah, whatever was left. Actually, I asked to be guided through all the 10 feathers, but it was like the remainders of feather 9 and 10. And so even though everything was empty, there was still a last holding onto something. And that was like the assumption that in my experience, there should be something reliable
Mhm.
with consistency, and that would make me happy, could be satisfactory in a way. And that these things like consistency, reliability, and satisfactoriness would be something that exist as things out there, real
Mhm.
things that could be found. And when these were seen as just concepts too, and also the seeking mind that, produced all the restlessness that came up in between, the whole house of cards collapsed really. And then it just, none of it made any sense any longer. Even asking questions, is there existence or non-existence or neither nor or whatever? It was just like asking what is the color of the unicorns on the moon. It was just hilarious in a way. And for a while, there was a looking back, maybe a mechanism or um, maybe habituous looking back and not finding. It was like looking for emptiness for a while and looking into a black hole. And that ended too after a while because it was seen as a concept as well. And there has been subtle, very, very subtle fixations that were seen through even after empty. Also, emptiness is empty, and but now they kind of like stick out like a sore thumb, and they all feel quite artificial. And so that's a subtle process that has been going on from the not finding and not caring, and so on, and all that has dropped too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I resonate with what you described there as this kind of like this looker or this kind of checker that like pops up and it's so used to checking, that even though you've seen that the checker itself doesn't exist and nothing could be found, even if it was looking for something, that the whole thing is conceptual and the whole thing has been seen through. But yet there's still this kind of like, yeah, restlessness or kind of like momentum or habitual kind of like energetic patterns or something that has this compulsive sort of nature to it that needs to kind of just kind of like peter out. Like it just is running, it's this sort of momentum that just needs to kind of relax over time, I think. So that release process, it's a process. Releasing is a process that kind of just burns itself out over time, where things
Mhm.
become they just unwind naturally
Yeah.
over.
The looking back and also the tendency of the mind to create a new state or perspective of the release or whatever. It's just like this tendency, and
Yeah,
then which sometimes needs to be seen through a couple of times, even after that. Yeah, because like I think 2 months after that, I really had like existential terror because the mind had fixated again, like this new normal, which really felt like zombie land, into like, oh my God, I'm gonna be stuck in this for the rest of my life, which lasted for about like 3 days, and then it was seen through. So these things can happen just because of the tendencies that are probably still there.
yeah, yeah. So what I think another thing that's valuable about what you're pointing to is that the this release process, it's a process, it's got its bumps, right? And things can kind of get, tight and then relax and so forth. But there's also sort of like a spontaneity in the releasing, the spontaneity and the emptiness of things, where things might arise during this releasing process, like ideas might catch a grip, or you might have a snag, in this releasing process. But then there's sort of like a spontaneity where you don't have to necessarily like apply the concepts of emptiness to the situation in order to see it through. There's sort of like a natural releasing, a natural letting go that sort of spontaneously happens as the body becomes the mind and the body become more and more um, oriented towards release. It just kind of starts to unwind itself naturally. So yeah, beautiful. Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough exploration here. I mean, we could go on and on and on for many hours, but I think this is a good kind of lay of the land for people. And of course, there's a lot more conversations and other videos and other parts of the website and so forth that people can look into. Um, and German speakers can look up your websites, both of you running workshops in German language, hopefully someday soon in English too. And we will look forward to having more conversations with you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Yeah.